Hey, what's up, y'all? Welcome to the 10th episode of the Better Leader podcast. Hard to believe we've done this 10 times, but excited to continue going. The title of today's podcast is Hug the Shade. Hug the Shade. You might be wondering, what in the world is he talking about? Well, this idea kind of came to me as I was watching the Summer Olympics, 2024 Summer Olympics in Paris, like many of you probably were. And one day I was watching the men's marathon, and there was a runner named Tamirai Tola who actually won this race. And what is really cool is he wasn't even supposed to be running until a couple of weeks before one of his teammates was injured, and so he took that slot and ended up winning gold and just totally crushed what was the most difficult Olympic marathon course to date due to the hills and everything that it entailed. And so as I was watching this race, they're running from Paris to Versailles and then back to Paris. And I watched Tamirai do something as he's heading back in to the finish line in Paris, and he begins to like hug the shade on the side of the course. So as he's passing the Eiffel Tower, right, there's all of these buildings on the right side, and there's some shade provided. And so he began hugging the shade. And I thought, wow, what a smart decision. I'd never thought through this before. If you're an endurance athlete or someone, you've probably thought about these things of what gives you an advantage. But I thought, he began hugging the shade on the right side of the course because of these buildings. And it was probably a couple degrees cooler over there. Maybe it was even less than that. Maybe it was more. I'm not sure. But hugging the shade provided him an advantage in finishing the race strong. And now I'm sure all the different runners did this, and it's probably a known thing. But I thought through, like, how in terms of our leadership, what can we learn from this? This idea of like hugging the shade, doing something small that helps improve our performance, hugging the shade in terms of how we lead our people, how we do what we do in our industry. How can we hug the shade? How can we make a small decision that helps us? And, going back to whenever I was coaching football, it was in 2020, we played a playoff football game. And I remember leading up to that game, we had struggled some on offense over the weeks, and we had implemented a new formation, which we called heavy. We had 3 backs in the backfield. And so as we started doing this, we started developing kind of plays off of this formation. And I remember finding on Twitter a coach who was posting plays from this same formation from a college level team. And so we got to this playoff game, and we had been running a sweep out of this formation over and over again. It was kind of our bread and butter out of that formation. And so we had been doing this. And I found this little wrinkle from another coach. I can't take credit for it. I just happened across it on Twitter by following this guy. And I remember we practiced it. We implemented this play where a running back was going to wheel out off the backside of this as we faked the sweep, and we were going to be able to throw it to him. That was the goal. We had been setting it up for weeks as we had been running this. And so we got to the game, and we had run the sweep a couple of times with success, and then it had been stopped a couple of times, and we were in a pretty critical situation. And what we ended up doing is we finally ran this play. So we swept to the right, but one of our running backs slipped out of the backfield and wheeled to the backside. We had even moved our backside receiver in to run a slant across the defense to kind of take the eyes away. And what happened is this running back ended up being wide open, and our quarterback it ended up being a 30-yard touchdown pass to our running back who had slipped out. And to me, that was just one of those little pieces of advantage, right? You're always looking for that little micro advantage you could have. We had been setting that up for a couple of weeks, and we had saved that play back. And it ended up paying off in a big way in a playoff game, which we had to win. And those are just examples of the little things that you're looking for that can help you out a lot. What are those little things that you could do? I don't know what it is in your industry or your area or even just in your personal leadership. What are those little things you can do that make a big difference? How can you hug the shade? Don't make it more difficult than it needs to be. And I think one other thing I thought of in hugging the shade and not making something more difficult than it needed to be is I think oftentimes leaders choose the wrong battles to fight. Maybe they're dealing with a difficult person or they've got a situation and they just focus in and they hone in in on something that doesn't really matter that much. And instead of hugging the shade, instead of taking not the easy way out, but choosing a easier route, instead of doing something that's not going to make their job more difficult, they focus and they can't seem to break free of doing that thing that's making their job more difficult. So I think it's important that we audit ourselves and look at, is there a battle I'm fighting that I really don't need to be? Could I be hugging the shade and let this alone? Was it's not really making a difference, but I'm so fixated and focused on this? I think hugging the shade and looking for these things, it's a lot of different ideas wrapped into one. But I believe when we look for those small advantages, when we don't make things harder than they need to be, it helps us in our leadership. I want to pivot here and talk about something else real quick, and that is talking about failure as a leader. Something that we're all going to experience as leaders is failure. And I want to give you a story of something that I just messed up in a major way. We had recently hosted a retreat for the young adult group that I help lead. And so we have hundreds of people coming to this retreat, and we have residents in our organization. These residents, they're not employees, but they work like employees. They're learning, they're training, they're growing. And so we give them tasks to do, and they're growing in their leadership and learning. And we had given a task away of one of the jobs we needed done and helped with our retreat. And it was simply bringing some drinks that we were giving as a hospitality moment at our check-in. And we have these massive coolers at High Street that we use. And so in my mind, we give this task away. I'm thinking they're going to bring 2 massive coolers with these drinks in. Easy moment to achieve. And we gave this task away. And our residents started to do it. One guy in particular was in charge of making sure this happened. Well, what I didn't do is I didn't even tell him that we had these massive coolers. And so he showed up with a bunch of small coolers like that you would put water or Gatorade in, and he had them full of ice and the drinks. And so instead of bringing 2 coolers, we ended up bringing about 8, which was totally fine. But when he arrived, my first response out loud was not one of thanks. It wasn't one of, man, I really appreciate you doing this. And then maybe later on I could say, hey, do you know that we have coolers? I said to him, I looked at him, why did you bring it in those coolers? And just the tone that I said it in was totally wrong. The timing of what I said was totally wrong. And immediately I just felt this shame and embarrassment come over me because I took someone who did do a job for us and got it done, right? He still got the job done. And I took it and I totally deflated the situation. And it was in front of other people as well. And so I'm totally just embarrassed as a leader because I did everything the wrong way. Well, what do you do when you fail like that? Here's the deal. You fail like that as well. I'll continue to have moments of failure like that. But what I want to do is I want to learn from that situation. I want to take time to learn that, man, I need to be slow to respond, even if something is confusing or it wasn't the way that I would have done it. And I need to have an attitude that is more celebratory in nature than focusing on getting it done the right way the first time. And it was a teaching moment, right? And it wasn't even a big deal. It was still a successful event. Everything was there. The drinks were there. We pulled off the moment. But I totally in that moment failed. And the other thing that I used to do when I was younger, when I would fail like that, that would have derailed me for the next 4 or 5 hours. I would have been so down on myself. I would have carried it with me. But what I did in this moment, in my moment of failure, was I pulled the guy aside. I told him that I was sorry. I acknowledged my failure in front of the rest of our team. And I just really acknowledged that moment and had to just own up to it. And I think as a leader, it's easy to not want to own up. You can make an excuse for what happened. But I knew in that moment I needed to own up to what happened. And I know that moving forward, I need to learn from that. And I need to slow myself down. And here's the deal. When you're leading, you are going to fail. And oftentimes it's going to be public. People are going to see it, and it's going to be evident to others. I think there's such power in just in humility, owning up to what you've done, but then also not just continuing to make the same mistake. And your apology is only going to be worth so much for so long, but you got to learn and you got to grow past those things. And don't just continue to carry it with you and sulk in it. If that's the type of person you are, where you're so ashamed and embarrassed and you just continue to just live in that, move on and make the right decision as you continue forward to lead in a correct way. And that was just a moment I experienced in the last couple weeks that I was just like, man, I missed the mark. I failed. I've got to correct this. I've got to apologize, and I've got to move on. And I want to encourage you to do that in your leadership as well. And don't be surprised when you fail, because you're going to. Just own up to it the right way. Shifting gears again. So we've talked about hugging the shade. We've talked about discipline. I do want to, or we've talked about failure. I do want to take a moment to talk about some disciplines that I'm trying to implement in my life, which have helped me to lead better at home. They have helped me to lead better where I work at church. They have helped me to just be more structured in what I'm doing. And so I want to tell you about these disciplines. And this isn't a brag for me that like, oh, I'm so disciplined this. Actually, the reason that I needed to do this is because I had been totally just letting things slip. As my family started back to school and everything this fall, I just noticed I was getting out of rhythm. I was starting to get really just kind of sloppy in what I was doing. So I knew I needed to increase my discipline. I knew I needed to get some habits going, right? Some atomic habits that would stack on another that would help make a difference. And one of the biggest things that was a struggle for us is I was struggling to get out the door. I was in a rush, and then I'm rushing my kids in the morning to go to school. And that's just not a great way to start the day for anybody, for my kids, for me. And also, I don't thrive with that. I thrive on the structure and the routine. And so I'd gotten sloppy. I knew I needed to make some changes. And here are some of the changes that I went back to. Some of these are disciplines that I had done before, but I knew, man, I've got to get back to doing some of these things. So the first thing that I do now each night is I get my clothes ready for the next day the night before. And this seems like a small thing. Maybe it's silly. You might already do that. But for me, that takes so much less mental energy then the next day. If I can go ahead, I'm going to lay what I'm going to wear out. Then in the morning, that's energy that I'm not even having to expend, and I can focus on helping my kids to get ready because I'm getting ready more quickly. I've already made the decision what I'm going to wear. I've laid it out the night before. The second thing that I've been doing is I actually, because I need a physical reminder, I got to drink water early in the day. If I don't do it, I don't like just sipping on water throughout the day. So for some of you, this might be totally irrelevant. But I literally set my water cup out on our stovetop the night before. I set it there along with my breakfast. I've already got it out and ready to go for the next day because it's a reminder to me, hey, I have got to get some water intake going before the day begins. And I share that discipline to say this, is what helps you develop new disciplines or new habits, if you will. What helps you is oftentimes having a physical reminder that you're going to do this because I set it on the stovetop. It's out in the middle. I see it every morning. And what that's going to do, because I can see it, is it's going to help me to make that into a permanent habit, or I hope that it's going to become a permanent habit. But I need that physical reminder. So maybe you're trying to develop a habit and you've been struggling with it. I think one of the things that helps is having that physical reminder there and present. Now, the other thing that I've been doing, because the mornings were like, hey, when I'm not spending time with God the way that I want to in the morning as much time. I'm not helping in a manner that I want to with our kids. I got to get out of the door on time. I want to teach my kids to be on time to places. I decided, man, I have got to get up 15 minutes earlier every day. And that seems small, right? And it is small. But I was like, that 15 minutes has made a huge difference for me. And that's something that I really want to continue because if you think about it, if I take 15 minutes, and none of us are perfect, right? Life happens, kids get sick, you've got different schedule, vacation, whatever. If I get up 15 minutes earlier every day for 300 days. I don't even make it 365 days, right? If for 300 days this next year, I get up 15 minutes earlier, what that's going to do is that's actually going to add 75 hours of time that I didn't have before. Now, if I take that 75 hours of time, maybe I continue this over the next decade, that's 750 hours. If you divide that out into days, that's going to be a little over 31 days worth of time that I'm getting back. What could I learn? What could I grow? How will my life be more effective? How will, I grow from having that time in the morning? And for me, I'm an extroverted person. I like talking to people. I love that aspect of my job, but I also need that space. I need that time, not only for me to spend time with God, but I also need that time because that's when I do some of my best thinking. That's when my mind is the most clear. And so I really need to take advantage of that time. I need that in order to be able to be effective in what I'm doing, and also to serve my wife well, to serve my family well. And the better I can start my day, the better I'm going to be able to lead. I think it bleeds and it trickles, right? And not every morning's going to be perfect. And I think you have to learn how to, put your bootstraps on. And if you have a bad morning, turn it around and still lead well. But I want to be able to have that as a focus so that I can lead more efficiently and more effectively as I go. So what did we talk about today? We talked about hugging the shade. Don't make things harder than they need to be, but also look for those small little advantages in whatever it is that you're doing. The second thing, when you fail, and you inevitably will fail, own up to it and learn from it. And lastly, what are those atomic habits, those little habits that you can begin to stack on top of each other that will make a big difference throughout your day? Well, I want to thank y'all for joining us for this 10th episode of the Better Leader podcast. If y'all are getting something out of this, I would just encourage you, would you rate it? Would you on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or subscribe on YouTube, and share it with your friends, other people who are leading, as we continue to all lean in and try and become better leaders. We'll catch y'all next time.